my short introduction here to you, you're a hardware provider on the Impossible Cloud Network, and at the moment you're mainly providing HDD disks, data storage disks, and I see customers can store their data in your facility. So
Yes,
recently you've surpassed the symbolic milestone of 1 petabyte of storage capacity. So for somebody who's fairly new to this, how much is 1 petabyte?
That's a really good question. You can compare it to a lot of things. One thing's for sure, though, nobody really fathoms how many bytes that actually is. But let's say, I think you can. How often can you store the whole global Netflix supply? A few hundred times. It's a massive amount of data. It's 1 million gigabytes.
That's a lot. It's a million. Yeah, it's exactly 1 million, right? It's It's 1,000 terabyte, and therefore 1 million, 1,000 times 1,000, so 1 million gigabyte. I just so if a movie is 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabytes, it would be like 500,000 movies stored on your capacity at the moment. That's quite a lot, but you haven't always had 1 petabyte of storage. So maybe lead us through how you got started, and let's go back where there was no gigabyte at all, or 0 gigabytes.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. The story actually began with me not using storage capacity for my business at all. Where we began almost 8 or 9 years ago, was with mining Ethereum. I was doing it solo in the beginning, testing out with some graphics cards. Ended up understanding how the mathematics work and how we could actually earn money on it. And I started to invest a small sum into hardware, not into tokens. I should have done that with hindsight, but that's not how it works. So I invested some funds into a few dozen of these graphics cards, and they scaled with the amount of money they generated. So I even eventually invested more and more. This was still at my initial house, and in the summer it was pretty damn hot with all those graphics cards churning around. So I ended up looking for places to stall them, and the people who were stalling them were also interested in making money in a similar manner. So where I started solo, eventually people started investing, and more people started investing, and the snowball just started rolling. And 1.5 years later, we had a few million euros worth of graphics cards in more than 6 facilities in the Netherlands, all running on Ethereum. This was between 2016 and 2021. And just to fast forward through the bear market back then, in 2021, the prices started to go back up, and we as a group decided to sell all the hardware and all the stuff that we had and invested in something that we will see ourselves doing in the next 10 years. And the answer for me was blockchain technology and storage. It was way back before ICN came around. It was during the startup of the Filecoin era. So we started up with building our edge data center here in Hidde Hoogland, and we have 2 co-location facilities in Amsterdam at the Gyro Center, which is now called Enlighten, and at the Global Switch Center. We did that for 2 years, and then we started to work on multiple projects outside of the Falcon ecosystem to make sure we are not only reliant on one source of income. And one of the answers back then was the first round of ICN storage providers. And that is how we connected. I met with some of your leadership on some of the Web3 meetups in Singapore and in Europe a few years ago. And we started up doing a small demo. And then we started with the first 5 petabytes in Amsterdam.
That sounds lovely. That was also very fast forward. Let's maybe go back to the initial parts of it, initial parts of your computing provider type of experience. So you said you started with Ethereum mining GPUs in your home, and then you built this up. Also, other people started investing, etc. How many GPUs did you have at the time, and what type of hardware was that?
I started out with 3 4070s from AMD. Back in the days when GPUs were still $150 each.
Okay.
You can't imagine that right now. And they were making about $3 a day, $2-3 a day. So the calculation was, how many GPUs do I need to pay the rent? And that was I think it was 24 or 30 cards. So I ended up buying 30 cards with all the components, and then came the whole learning curve, because it was a mess to run this many cards in these old motherboards with power. And as I told you, the heat was unbearable during the summer. So I ended up hosting a few locations, business location in the region, where they have sufficient power to run 100 cards or 200 cards. And after a year, we had almost 6,000 GPUs running on 6 different locations, and we ended up placing all of them into one large facility in Hidde Hoogland, and that's the same building where we are still at.
I understand. So once this kind of got out of control, you had to expand, and you were kind of forced to professionalize this mining operation. You said you had a steep learning curve. Can you maybe go into a little bit more detail? What did you learn from expanding that, and what did you learn in terms of how a hardware provider in general is, I would say, a person that is facilitating mining is also some sort of hardware provider, right? What did you learn from that?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, you didn't have ChatGPT to ask you whatever bugs or things you see. The only thing you had was forums online and the things you can find through Google. Running these graphics cards with more than 4 or 5 into one system, with custom cables and custom software, and even completely randomized BIOSes on these cards to overclock and undervolt them. That was a special journey to go on. But the more mistakes you make when you're smaller, you don't have to take them when you grow larger. So all the initial pain points on speed and heat and power and consumption and compactability, that was made when I was still pretty small. So when we grew to thousands of cards, we knew what we needed to buy. We knew which brands, which types, which chassis, and we even could pretty easily bear the heat during the summer with all those cards, because it was pretty damn hot.
I understand. Okay, so speed, heat, power, consumption. I understand those are like the pain points of somebody who's expanding his GPU operations. Then you said you transitioned towards the Filecoin ecosystem, which is more of a storage service ecosystem. Maybe you can go into a little bit more details. Why did you leave Ethereum ecosystem if that was profitable, and what did you think was interesting about the Filecoin ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the main thing was I was questioning myself, what do I see myself do in 10 years? And the GPU hardware wears out pretty quickly compared to hard drives. A lot of these large-scale cloud storage providers still use 12, 14, 16 terabyte drives, even though they're like 8 or 9 years old. But with GPUs, if you have a GPU older than 2 years, it's already so old that it's mostly worthless.
That's because of the curve or like the speed that things are progressing and innovation is happening, or is it because they just wear out because they're so heavily used?
Both.
Okay.
An average GPU in this era uses about 250 to 300 watts, and an average hard drive uses about 5 to 10 watts. So the drives, of course, have spinning platters, which degrade over time, but much less so than the actual wear of a GPU when you run it at a 100% load 24/7. So the main question to me was, we have all this old gear, which in 1 or 2 years will be worth zero. And we invested millions into purchasing them. They've been running for 3 years. Two of those years were highly unprofitable due to the bear market. And right now we are going into a new bull market, and everybody has demand for these cars. Even though they're old, they're still making $1 or $2 a day. So we ended up deciding in the peak of the uplift of the tokens to sell all the cards to entities who want to make a quick buck. I hope they did. But we decided to go into something that's more long-term, like something with storage. And the second reason is I wanted to do something useful, where the usefulness of a 4080 back then was providing compute power to the Ethereum network, which in of itself is something useful, the mathematical calculations that the cards are doing are technically wasted. So providing storage capacity while running a blockchain seemed more of a natural next step for us, because I can actually store client data while working with the blockchain and doing something useful and earning money. So
that makes a ton of sense. The service itself is valuable for the customer, while with Ethereum or Bitcoin mining, the service itself is kind of wasted. It's mainly to keep the consensus on the
consensus
going, right?
Which is very valuable. It's worth billions if you look at market cap, but inherently it's not something that's actually being used to do cancer research or to do something valuable to the community. It's just for chain consensus.
Understand. So you found the Filecoin ecosystem, and you found storing data is a more valuable service in your opinion, and you wanted to do that in the future. In terms of hardware, how is it different?
Oh, it's a full 360. Where with Ethereum mining, or you can better say with GPU mining, because you can mine as many chains as you like with GPUs. You were basically limited to the cost per GPU and the revenue per GPU compared to the power usage, and all the other components were like they were as cheap as you can find them. So if you could run on USB drives, run on USB drives. If you can have a really cheap old motherboard, but it has enough PCIe to host the cards, you buy it. It's you didn't need to invest a lot in these additional things. While compared to what we're doing now with Ethereum, all of the components, with Filecoin and ICN, all of the components are enterprise grade systems, fully equipped with really high specs, which is something that's normal in a data center environment, but that was not normal during the mining era of Ethereum.
I understand. Okay, so it's entirely different hardware, and you're using more sophisticated hardware now, since the service is, as in, the service has a quality component to it, whereas the mining of consensus mechanisms has more of a, let's say, quantity to it. So as long as the job gets done, it's okay, but you don't have need these quality components in it.
It's also a bit of risk, because back in the day when these 6,000 cards were offline for 24 hours, the only one having an issue was me. There was no issue with the Ethereum network whatsoever. All the transactions were completed with or without me on the network. Well, when you're doing Filecoin or ICN or storage protocols on blockchain, you have an obligation to serve the files that entities stored at your facility. So you need to upgrade, for example, the redundancy of your power. You need to upgrade the redundancy of your bandwidth. You need to upgrade your bandwidth anyway, because storing petabytes requires 10, 20, maybe a 50 gigabyte backbone, and doing Ethereum or Bitcoin mining, just a 100 megabit line. Even with satellite, you could do it. So all the components are highly upgraded into a data center environment compared to what it was with GPU mining. Yeah,
I like that. I understand that, and let's stick to that a little bit more and talk about like the operations side of things, the network infrastructure setup of your current data center. Maybe you can guide me through what are the core components of having a enterprise grade data center.
So we have 3 facilities that we use. One is our own. That's the location where we are right now. It's our own edge data center in Hidde Hoogland. It's a tier 1. It's a pretty basic DC, but we are the only one with access. So the only thing we care about is the power redundancy and the bandwidth redundancy. Everything else is locked down. It's our own warehouse. It's our own facility. We have 2 megawatts available here. A lot of rack space and a lot of office space as well. A little bit too much, if you ask me. The other 2 facilities we use, as I said in the intro, is Global Switch and Enlighten, or the Gyro Center. And these are both tier 3 data centers in Amsterdam. And together we have our own backbone. We have dark fiber cables between these 3 regions. And whenever there's a customer with specific requirements on certifications or specific requirements on power or whatever they have, we select the best option for them.
So you have your own data center. That's Hidde Hoogland, is that right?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with your name?
Beautiful name. I know. It's really Dutch. It's 40 kilometers above Amsterdam.
I understand. And then you have the two other data centers that have a bit higher in terms of certifications. They're a bit higher up the tiers. So you're using that as a co-location, or what? How can I understand that?
Yeah, we use those other facilities for the clients that require us to put their data storage or their compute units or whatever they host from us. We put them in those regions. We are also opening a new region in Frankfurt, but we can talk more about that later. And for example, we have a lot of Falcon storage capacity in Amsterdam, but we have a lot of Falcon compute machines in Hidde Hoogland, because those compute machines are not important to clients. They can go offline or online, whatever they want. They don't need those high tiers, but the storage capacity does. So that's how we move and shift hardware around these three facilities.
I understand. So just to go to the basics real quick. So you have your own data center kind of, and then you have these co-location data centers where you are renting space in this data center, and thereby you can benefit from the high qualifications that these data centers have at the moment. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I understand. Okay. So why don't we go into some of these certifications for a moment, and you tell me, why does a data center need to be certified, or why do customers require their data centers to have certain certifications?
Well, it would make complete sense if you trust someone to store your data, that they're storing it in a location where they're certain that it won't be lost. So a minimum amount of certifications, whichever certification it is, depends on which data center you co-locate. But if you compare us to any other storage provider or on ICN or Falcon or another protocol, almost all of them will be located in co-located data centers. I know near zero entities who have the luxury of hosting their own facility. So we are really happy that we have that. It makes it extremely flexible for us to run demos or execute on quick assignments from clients. But we are well aware that some clients have really high needs, so then we go to Global Switch specifically. They're even higher tiered than the one at Enlighten, even though they're working on upgrading their certifications. It's the same story with the Frankfurt expansion. It's also a pretty high certified location. But the main reason for clients is trust. And especially when it comes to storage, even more than compute, you need to be certain that the physical drives are located somewhere where you can trust it for the next few years.
I understand. So these certifications, they guarantee, or there's a third party guaranteeing that the data center meets all the requirements in terms of security and everything that's needed for a client to trust you with their data.
Yeah, exactly. There are proofs that need to be done every 12 months or 24 months or for longer periods on each of these certifications to be sure that the minimum requirements are upheld by the facility.
I got it. So this is real pro game. And before we talk about your future plans, you mentioned it earlier, compute units and Frankfurt expansion, etc. Let's go one last time back to the beginning. So if you had to get started today, you want to become a hardware provider for storage capacity, for example, what would you do? How would you start? What would the minimum financial investment, for example, be, and what hardware would you source?
That's a good question. Looking at the graphs I got from your colleagues, the minimum requirement to become an SP currently for ICN, let's focus on that point, is about 3.5 to 4 petabytes in size. Depending on the costs you have as a storage provider on purchasing these drives per terabyte, you can come up with a specific amount of money you need. Then, of course, you need a lot of hardware to host those HDDs. And then also there's a bit of overhead in compute necessary to do the compute components to run your stack, the ICN stack on top of the nodes. So, for example, the Amsterdam expansion that we are running has about 100,000 USD worth of compute and storage, compute and enclosures, and about 100K worth of HDDs and combined they make a 5.4 petabyte endpoint in the Amsterdam region.
Okay, but that's a solid node, I assume, right?
It's quite a large node, but it's quite a lot of storage as well. Mm-hmm. It's again, as you started with, how much is a petabyte? Well, it's a huge amount of storage. The almost 60 hard drives of 18 terabytes. So yes, it's a lot. So those hard drives aren't cheap.
I understand. Okay, wonderful. And in terms of technical knowledge and understanding, how far do you need to understand a protocol such as Filecoin or ICN in order to become a hardware provider?
Currently, the amount of knowledge needed to enter the Filecoin ecosystem is extremely high, because the amount of hours we spend on developing our own tools to be able to work with the tools that the community provides is just huge. Months of work. You can do it at small scale, but scaling up is going to be really, really tough. On ICN currently, it's pretty low barrier to enter. As long as you have the know-how and the funds to start a storage provider, a lot of the compute and a lot of the setup will be managed by your technical staff currently. And they help you pretty well with setting everything up, and they won't stop until it's perfect. So that wasn't that difficult. And my expertise is hardware. My colleague's expertise is networking. And the other expertise of my other colleague is software. So we can swap a third to each one, and then we can finish it. So
wonderful. Sounds like you're set up to expand even further and really push this DCENT project through the roof. Maybe go into a little bit more details about what you already mentioned, future expansions. You're opening something up in Frankfurt, new shop. Can you give me a little bit more details? What are you planning there?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's no NDA signed about this expansion. We have been discussing with Florian Amarizzo and Chris, who is now my talking endpoint. I was normally talking to Leonard, but now it's Chris. We've been discussing another expansion, and the region where they need storage the most currently is in Frankfurt, because most of the customers and clients are in that region. So we discussed expanding with another 5 or 10 or maybe 15 petabytes of storage capacity in a new data center in Enlighten in Frankfurt. And we have just received all the quotations for the monthly OPEX and the connectivity and the hardware. So we are ready to expand into that region as soon as next month.
That sounds like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, we are here for long term. So the bigger the size, the better. It's just that the initial investment keeps on growing when you want to go larger and larger and larger. So yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. At some point, you'll need to go public with that, or find some other ways of financing this,
or say thank you and please to the bank. No, it will be fine. It will be fine.
Okay. Wonderful. So maybe one point that I don't want to have don't want to leave untouched is sustainability. We've spoken about like lots of energy that is needed to run all this hardware, etc. But you, to my knowledge, you have a pretty well system already in place. You have a lot of solar panels. Maybe you can guide me through the ideas you had previously in terms of sustainability, why you made an investment in that region, and what is it bringing?
Yeah, so the main reason for installing 800 panels on our own roof, I mean, one of the main reasons is because we can. We are lucky that we have this huge roof.
Right.
We're sitting idle. So, and my colleague is deeply invested into a large solar company in the region. So 1 + 1 = 2. And for us, it was, we need solar panels as ASAP. So we now have 800 solar panels on the roof. And during summer, we are almost at zero power between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. When it's a sunny day in the Netherlands, at least. So that's extremely helpful for our own OPEX. 2 issues on that front: that the power grid in the Netherlands is really, really tight currently. So when the sun is abundant and everybody has solar, then every kilowatt that you give back to the grid will cost you money instead of making you money. So we are now trying to balance out the amount of solar panels, their generation, with our own usage, and it's about 150 kilowatts currently in our own facility. It's not that much, but it's still a hefty amount. And we are now trying to work with the market and with the prices with a large battery system. So we are now exploring to buy a battery system from a company in Norway, and we might add a megawatt of battery capacity to our own. We now have 100 kilowatts, which is pretty small. We want to add a megawatt so we can also trade and use it as a backup system for the data center, and also as a way of income when the prices are extremely cheap or extremely expensive. We can play around with. That's the goal for the end of this year.
That sounds wonderful. So that sounds like a real solar punk type of vision you have at the moment.
Yeah, we can never go net zero because we use the same amount of power at night as a day, and the wind is sometimes blowing and sometimes it's not. So being 100% renewable is a no-go for us. But we offset all the kilowatts that we use with wind racks. So we did that from the start. And all the power that we can generate on our own and use, we will.
Fantastic. So, going back to Impossible Cloud Network and your collaboration with this project, maybe you can tell me a little bit about the first time you met ICN, or you heard about. At that time, it probably was only Impossible Cloud. Guide me through how you were made aware of this project.
Yeah, so we had a lot of flying around in the first 2 years with Filecoin and with Protocol Labs and the Foundation. And we did a lot of meetups with a lot of tech companies and Web3 startups and new protocols. And of course, large European storage providers were very interesting for us to try and collaborate with. And we tried with a few of them. One of them was Wasabi and one of them was Impossible Cloud. And both of these entities came back with, it's going to be really difficult to merge your tooling and your backbone with ours. So probably a no-go. But we kept in touch. And a few months later, I got a message from one of your colleagues about the fact that you were trying to build something that's even better than Filecoin, and going to launch it soon and need some assistance with storage providers. So if we were interested, and of course, diversifying to a business where there's already a customer base behind is a no-brainer. So we ended up talking and discussing what the terms were and what the securities were and what the risks were. And I think last year, March 2024, we started out in Amsterdam with 5 petabytes. We are still running.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's in that sense. That's of course always a pro factor in your decision if you know that there's a already demand for a service and you're not just supplying onto a network that doesn't really have a customer yet. I think that's something that was really standing out with ICN in the beginning.
Well, that's the endless discussion about all the DeepIn networks. Right. Are they physical? Yes. Are they worth more than random tokens generated? Yes. Is there an inherent customer base behind it? Yes, all the people investing, but that's not really fair. But always the question is who's using this? Who's using the Wi-Fi? Who's using the storage? Who's using the compute? And almost all of the times it's something flawed in the system where people are self-storing or self-dealing or self-renting and there are not that many projects where there's a real customer base behind it, making it a not zero-sum game for these DeepIns. That's the problem of all the DeepIns out there.
So if you look at DeepIns in terms of this, in this angle, where do you think we are at the moment? If you look at the whole market, how many percentages of them actually have traction, have demand, and do you think we're going in the right direction?
Well, the only thing I can compare you against is what we can see on our endpoint being stored. That's a little bit over 20% now in this first period of we got the first year. And of course, it's your first year, so don't expect extreme statistics. The volume that we see online through ICN and the discussions I have with your technical team and your demand for more and more capacity is a good sign. It means you have you are not going to use this data if there's no customer on the other end. The problem with the other deep-in projects, let's for example say Filecoin, there was inherently no customer needed to generate income. So you could just onboard an exabyte, earn an exabyte, and there's not even 1 gigabyte of files stored on those drives. And that is, in my opinion, an inherent flaw. The other option you have is you go the route of Storj, which is also a great project. We also work with them. They did it the other way around. They just accepted new nodes when there was demand. So to make sure that there's not too much nodes online, so that A, their token won't inflate, or B, there will be not enough money for the entities who are actually storing customer data. So it's really difficult to balance this, but I think what ICN is doing is pretty well. It's a good combination of decentralized and centralization. It should be a mix, in my opinion.
Totally, and I think there's multiple ways of tackling this problem. Of course, like you said, Storj, they only onboard a new hardware provider when there's somebody who actually uses his capacity. With ICN, it's a little bit different. There's this demand is a central part of the tokenomics, where you only have certain token rewards for the hardware providers at a certain capacity utilization rate, and that's of course something that's also making it possible to have enough demand all the time on the network and don't have like empty halls of unused storage capacity, etc. That makes a lot of sense. One question I have, what you said, you were talking to Wasabi as well, for example, which is a rather Web2 storage provider. You said it's complicated to merge the backbone, etc. Can you maybe guide me through how complicated is it for somebody who is interested in data center infrastructure, who has it or who's operating a data center, to find customers for his project? Or can you just build a data center and plug it into, let's say, one of the Web2 providers, etc.? Is that possible?
Yeah, well, no. The way that Web2 storage providers or Web2 cloud providers work is that they have their own magic recipe for the purchasing of hardware, the utilization of their hardware, and of course their own customer base who rents their hardware. You cannot just add a petabyte in a different location and say use it, because that's not how their business works. And the reason why especially Wasabi told us like this is never going to happen was because they took a deep dive into the then developed software of Filecoin, how the stack worked on top of the actual blockchain, and they just said like this is never going to be mergeable. Many reasons for that, but most likely the main reason is that currently how Filecoin sits, it's super useful for long-term cold storage. Mm-hmm. And all of these Web3 providers or Web2 providers are, for example, offering streaming services. If you do a cold retrieval from the Filecoin network, you need at least 4 hours. You're not going to wait 4 hours for a Netflix movie. So that there were a lot of bottlenecks and a lot of maturity problems with some of the tools that weren't an answer to a collaboration. So they just said no. In that time, Impossible Cloud Network wasn't a thing yet, as far as I recall. Most likely on someone's mind, but it was still only Impossible Cloud. So you were also a Web2 provider back then. So it wasn't a you problem. It was most likely these deep-in networks that offer storage weren't just mature enough to offer any real collaboration with these large cloud giants.
I understand. So, as I understand it, technically it would be possible, but most of the Web2 providers are, of course, staying far away from third-party hardware, since that's the problem that DeepIn is trying to solve in the cloud space, to create an open cloud, create an operating system where third-party hardware can actually plug in seamlessly and provide their capacity to a shared pool of hardware, instead of relying on one entity like Wasabi, like AWS, etc., to build out all the hardware on their own balance sheet, so to say, right?